Hello, I'm John.
And I'm Nico.
And we are Panther Aerospace. Today we will bring you
the complete history
of SpaceX's Starship
and its first orbital launch.
So sit back, relax,
and enjoy.
Panther Aerospace's Starship Special. Pre-FAA approval. Introduction. March 2022. Our story begins with the construction of SpaceX's first orbit-capable stack. Ship 24 is the Starship, and Booster 7, as you guessed it, the booster. In March 2022, the previous Starship prototypes, Booster 4 and Ship 20, were finished with testing. Something on Booster 4 broke, permitting it from further use in the testing campaign. Elon Musk then decided the next pair of prototypes, Booster 7 and Ship 24, will be the pair to complete the first orbital launch. On the 31st of that month, Booster 7 rolled down Highway 4 to Starbase's launch site near Brownsville, Texas. 2 days later, it was lifted onto the orbital launch mount for the first time via a SpaceX-owned Liebherr LR 11,000 crawler crane.
On April 4th, Booster 7 underwent its first cryogenic proof test. For those who haven't heard of SpaceX or their Starship test campaign, here is some clarification. The main test SpaceX conducts with its Starships. Prototypes are cryogenic proof tests, spin primes, and static fires.
During a cryogenic proof test, SpaceX fills a Starship or booster's fuel tanks with liquid nitrogen at below freezing temperatures to see how well the vehicle's structure holds whilst carrying propellant. Liquid nitrogen is used for these tests as it is non-flammable and doesn't react to oxygen. When a spin prime test is conducted, the Raptor 2 engines on both Starship and Super Heavy have their turbopumps, a crucial part of the engine, brought up to speed without an ignition. Gases are seen being vented through the engine nozzles during these tests. A static fire is the same as a spin prime test, but with an ignition. Both spin primes and static fires are used to test to see if the engines and related systems work when connected to a Starship. April 2022.
On April 8th, Booster 7 was lifted off the OLM onto a structural test stand designed to stimulate thrust pushed into the booster by the engines at liftoff. We will refer to this test stand as the can crusher. The following week, on the 12th, the booster was tested for its second cryo test, followed by a third cryo test on the 14th. The thrust rams on the can crusher were tested on the third test, and Booster 7's downcomer crumbled inside the booster's header tank. It was lifted off the can crusher 4 days later and was rolled 2 miles down the road to the production site for repairs.
May 2022.
Over the next few weeks, Booster 7 underwent repairs so it could resume testing. In the meanwhile, Starship 24 was finishing construction. On May 6th, Booster 7 rolled out for its second time. This time, it was lifted via the crane onto the OLM and not the can crusher. Its last cryo tests were completed the following week on the 9th and 11th. Booster 7 was lifted off and brought back to the production site in the next few days.
Ship 24 was rolled out for the first time on May 26th, completing an ambient test the next day with the header tank pipe failing. On a Starship, the header tanks are located at the tip of the nose cone, so it can be balanced when it does a belly flop like a skydiver. Repair work was completed on the night of May 30th, stretching into the early hours of June 1st. June 2022.
June was a big month for Starship. Early that month, SpaceX installed the grid fins and Raptor 2 engines on Booster 7 to prepare it for its third rollout ahead of the static fire testing. Ship 24 started its cryo test campaign on June 2nd with the first test taking place at the cryo station near the orbital. Tank farm confirmed a success. The Starship was then moved over the suborbital pad A for cryogenic and thrust ram testing. It was lifted onto the pad on June 4th. The originally planned date for Launchpalooza 2, Ship 24's second and third cryo tests took place on the 6th and the 7th, with the rollback happening on the 9th.
On June 11th, Elon Musk confirmed on Twitter that all of Booster 7's engines were installed. It rolled out on the 23rd for the third time and was lifted onto the OLM, this time with the tower's catch arms, commonly referred to as chopsticks. An igniter test occurred on the 25th, with an unknown test involving ambient venting and venting out of the engines happening 2 days later. After months of waiting, the FAA on June 13th approved orbital launches of Starship from Starbase, but there's a catch. Only over 75 mitigations needed to be completed before a launch license can be granted. These mitigations were completed to protect the surrounding environment from potential impacts of the Starship program. Post-FAA approval, July 2022.
With the FFA approval given, SpaceX was in for a fiery summer as preparation for static fire testing ramped up. Ship 24 returned to launch site for the second time on June 5th after receiving paint and its remaining heat shield tiles before being lifted onto pad B. The next day, on the day of the lift, Booster 7's engine igniters were tested for the second and final time. The second week, on July 11th, Booster 7 underwent its first spin prime test using all 33 engines, resulting in a massive fireball and OLM damage. The fires were quickly extinguished via drones, but Booster 7 had to be lifted off and brought back to the production site for repairs 3 days later.
Ship 24 underwent 5 spin primes and an igniter test in a week, from July 18th to July 21st. Flap movement tests were conducted on the 28th. August 2022. As SpaceX scrambled to complete repairs to Booster 7 and the OLM, Ship 24 continued towards its first static fire. On August 4th, Pad B underwent a deluge test, where water was sprayed to test the pad's fire suppression system for future static fires. Another test of the deluge was conducted on the 24th. On the night of the 5th, Booster 7 rolled out to the launch site for the 4th time, with its outer 20 engines installed for static fire testing. The catch arms suffered a hydraulic issue, so SpaceX had to use their Liebherr LR 11000 to lift Booster 7 onto the OLM. During a road closure on August 8th, Booster 7 and Ship 24 completed 2 spin primes each. The next day, Booster 7 completed its first static fire with 1 engine, and Ship 24 fired 2 of its engines the same day.
When its first static fire completed testing on Ship 24 wrapped up for the month, but testing on Booster 7 rapidly advanced on the 11th. Booster 7 completed its second static fire with 1 engine firing for 20 seconds. The booster was lifted off the OLM with a crane. The next day, and rolled back to the production site to receive its center engines.
2 weeks later, on the 23rd, the chopsticks were repaired and Booster 7 rolled out once again to be lifted onto the pad. 2 spin primes were conducted on the 25th, with a 3-engine static fire lasting 5 seconds on the 31st. Two engines fired successfully, but the third shut down early. September 2022.
Testing of Ship 24 resumed in September. On the first flap tests were conducted during a structural test of the test tank
B7.1.
A vacuum-optimized Raptor 2 engine was removed from the ship a day later. The following week, on the 8th, Booster 7 tested all of its engines in a Spin Prime test. Ship 24 did its largest static fire, testing all 6 engines. A massive fire at the launch site resulted, but was suppressed later than that. Firefighters did controlled burns of the grass surrounding the launch site to ensure no fires could happen ever again.
With the fires suppressed, testing on Ship 24 came to a halt once again, so modifications could be completed. On September 21st, the payload door built into Ship 24 was permanently sealed, meaning it would not carry any Starlink Gen 2 satellites into space. On the 30th, the ship was lifted off Pad B and onto a transport stand.
Not only did the ship complete some testing, but Booster 7 was in for another round of engine tests. 3 Spin Primes were conducted on the 12th, 16th, and 19th respectively. On the same day of the 3rd Spin Prime, Booster 7 did its 4th static fire with 7 engines. It was lifted off the OLM and rolled back 2 days later.
October 2022. After several cryogenic and static fire tests, it was then time for SpaceX to stack Ship 24 on top of Booster 7 for the first time. On October 7th, Booster 7 rolled out to the launch site for the 6th time, lifted onto the OLM 3 days later. Ship 24 was stacked onto Booster 7 on the 11th, then realigned the following day. SpaceX encountered issues with the new quick disconnect system's alignment, causing a cryo test to be aborted. This new QD system is positioned higher up than the QD used on Ship 20, due to Ship 24 having a new QD system and plumbing.
After the QD was troubleshooted, SpaceX conducted some propellant tests on the full stacked. Single species propellant tests are tests where only a single type of propellant, either LOX or methane, in its designated tanks. The LOX tanks were tested on the 24th, while the methane tanks were tested on the 26th prior to these tests. Ship 24 was destacked from Booster 7 on the 16th due to high winds and restacked on the 20th.
November 2022. In addition to the 2 propellant tests completed in October, SpaceX conducted 3 more on November 3rd and 7th. 1 methane test and 1 LOX test were completed on the 3rd, while a single methane test was conducted on the 7th. Ship 24 was destacked the following day, before being rolled over to Pad B for upgrades in its final static fire. After weeks of upgrades, the OLM's fire suppression system was tested twice on the 10th, along with Booster 7's 10th Spin Prime test.
On November 14th, Booster 7 completed its 5th static fire, its first with more than 10 engines. 14 Raptor 2 engines were fired for 10 seconds. Following Thanksgiving, SpaceX completed a long-duration test, firing of 11 Raptor 2 engines for 13 seconds. The LOX tank was fully fueled during this static fire to test autogenous pressurization on the booster. An additional 2 fire suppression system tests were completed the day before.
Starting on November 24th, Ship 24 received its upgrades for the orbital test flight, as scaffolding was erected around the vehicle. These upgrades were completed on December 13th. December 2022.
After Booster 7 completed its big static fires, it was then time to bring it back to the production site for engine shielding over the course of 3 days from December 1st to 3rd. A center and outer engine were removed from the booster before it was lifted off and rolled back. Booster 7 would not return to the OLM until after the OLM clamp tests were completed in January. Ship 24 completed its final static fire prior to the orbital launch, testing one center engine on the 15th.
Final preparations, January 2023. After the OLM clamp tests were completed, Booster 7 moved back to the launch site for final pre-launch tests on January 8th. Ship 24 was lifted off Pad B 3 days earlier to prepare for more full stack testing. On the 9th, Booster 7 was lifted onto the OLM with the chopsticks once again, with Ship 24 to follow later that day.
Following full stack operations, it was then time for SpaceX to conduct a wet dress rehearsal, or WDR, is a test where a rocket is fully fueled and the launch countdown is rehearsed up to engine ignition. The first 2 WDR tests were on the 13th and the 18th, respectively. Had a partial fuel load on the full stack to test out systems before the full WDR.
These partial tests went well, and on January 23rd, SpaceX went ahead to fully fill Starship's tanks in the 3rd wet dress rehearsal. Starship was filled with more than 10 million pounds, 5,000 US tons of liquid methane and liquid oxygen, becoming the heaviest rocket ever built. The fire suppression system was used in the countdown, and the rocket, or should I say Starbase, did not explode. On the 25th, Ship 24 was destacked following the test and was rolled back to the production site a day later. Ship 24's lifting points were removed prior to launch on the 28th. February 2023.
With the wet dress rehearsal completed, it was time for SpaceX to complete Booster 7's final static fire on February 9th. The booster lit its engines for the final time in the biggest static fire test of any rocket in human history, outclassing the power of a Saturn V with just 50% throttle on all engines.
Elon Musk later revealed
that 2 engines did not fire, but the remaining 31 engines are still enough to reach orbit. He also confirmed that all engines will be throttled at 90% during the orbital flight test, which at the time of recording is scheduled for sometime in March.
Booster 7 conducted a Spin Prime test on the 17th, presumably to test one of the engines that failed to fire during the 31 engine test. As of the time of recording, you have been caught up to date on the story of the first orbit-capable Starship. There will be a part 2 coming up after the orbital launch. Hopefully it launches well.
This is
Panther Aerospace signing out.